Snow White wasn't always the cheerful fairy tale of love and magic that Disney made famous. The original story is far more disturbing, a nightmare filled with jealousy, violence, and even cannibalism. And once you hear it, you'll never think of Snow White the same way again. But before we dive into the dark origins, make sure you subscribe to the Silent Lodge for more amazing creepy history and folklore content every week. When most people picture Snow White, they think of Disney's 1937 animated classic, the first full-length animated feature in history. In that version, Snow White is a sweet, innocent girl with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. She's forced to flee into the forest, befriends 7 quirky dwarfs, and after falling into a poisoned sleep, she's revived by true love's kiss. The movie ends with a happily ever after, but the Disney film is just one version, a highly sanitized one. The actual tale, as written down by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm in 1812, paints a much darker picture. These were stories never meant only for children. They carried lessons, warnings, and brutal consequences. And in Snow White's case, those consequences were horrifying. To understand the real Snow White, we need to step back into the early 19th century. The Brothers Grimm were German scholars who wanted to preserve old folk tales and oral traditions before they vanished. They collected stories from rural villages, often told by families around the fire, and published them in a book called Children's and Household Tales. Snow White appeared in the very first edition. But instead of a light-hearted adventure, this version introduced a cruel, vain stepmother, a child targeted for her beauty, and punishments so disturbing that modern readers are often shocked. The story begins with the Queen, Snow White's stepmother. She's obsessed with her appearance, and every day she consults a magic mirror with the famous line, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For years, the mirror confirms her vanity. You are the fairest. But one day, everything changes. Snow White grows into a young woman, and the mirror delivers a new verdict. You, my queen, are fair, but Snow White is fairer still. This single moment ignites the queen's jealousy. Unlike Disney's cartoon villainess, the Grimm version is ruthless. She doesn't simply plot or trick. She wants Snow White dead. Consumed by envy, the queen orders a huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest, kill her, and bring back proof. But not just any proof. She demands the girl's lungs and liver, which she plans to eat. Yes, in the original tale, Snow White's stepmother is prepared to consume her remains, a grotesque mix of vanity and ritual cannibalism. But the huntsman, overwhelmed by the girl's innocence, spares her life. Instead, he slaughters a wild boar, removes its organs, and delivers them to the queen. Believing she has triumphed, the queen salts and eats them, convinced she has destroyed her rival. When the huntsman spares Snow White's life, she is left alone in the vast German forest. Imagine being just a child, lost, terrified, and certain that someone wants you dead. In the Grimm Brothers version, Snow White wanders until she discovers a small, secluded cottage. Inside, everything is tiny: chairs, dishes, and beds. Exhausted, she falls asleep in one of them. By nightfall, the owners return, 7 dwarfs who mine deep in the mountains. Unlike Disney's jolly hi-ho companions, the Grimm dwarfs are cautious but kind. They agree to shelter Snow White, but only if she contributes. She must cook, clean, and keep house. In exchange, they promise to protect her. For a moment, it seems Snow White is safe, but the queen's jealousy hasn't burned out. Back at the castle, her magic mirror once again reveals the truth. Snow White still lives, and she remains the fairest of them all. Enraged, the queen disguises herself as an old peddler woman. She fills a basket with laces and travels to the dwarf's cottage. When Snow White answers the door, the queen convinces her to try on a new lace bodice. Pulling the cords tightly, she strangles the girl until she collapses, motionless. The queen leaves, satisfied that her rival is dead. But when the dwarfs return, they loosen the bodice and revive Snow White. It is the first of several murder attempts, each darker than the last. The next time, the queen returns in disguise with a poisoned comb. She persuades Snow White to let her brush her hair. As soon as the comb touches her scalp, poison seeps into her skin, and Snow White collapses again. The dwarfs, suspicious of any gifts from strangers, pull the comb out and revive her once more. This detail, absent from Disney's version, shows how persistence and disguise are central to the Grimm tale. The queen refuses to stop, and each time she grows more cunning. The final attempt is the one most people recognize: the poisoned apple. Disguised once again, the queen offers Snow White a shiny red apple, but cleverly only poisons one half. She takes a bite from the safe side to reassure the girl, then offers the deadly half. Snow White, convinced it is harmless, takes a bite. The poison works instantly. She falls to the ground, pale and lifeless, and this time, nothing the dwarfs do can revive her. Believing she has finally succeeded, the queen returns to her castle. When she asks her mirror the famous question again, it answers with satisfaction. "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." But the story does not end here. After Snow White eats the poisoned apple, she collapses into what appears to be death. Her skin remains as white as snow, her lips red as blood, and her hair black as ebony, but her body is lifeless. The dwarfs, devastated, cannot bring themselves to bury her. Instead, they craft a coffin of glass, trimmed with gold, so her beauty can be admired even in death. They place her inside and keep watch over her day and night. Birds of the forest mourn alongside them, owls, ravens, and doves, according to the Grimm Brothers text. Time passes. Days turn into months, and months into years. Yet Snow White does not decay. She remains as beautiful as the day she fell. The dwarfs, unable to let go, keep her coffin in the forest, where all who pass can see her eternal sleep. Eventually, a young prince hears of the maiden in the glass coffin. Curious, he travels to the dwarf's cottage to see her. Struck by her beauty, he begs them to let him take the coffin to his castle. At first, the dwarfs refuse. Snow White has become part of their lives. Giving her up feels impossible. But the prince insists, saying he cannot live without gazing upon her. Finally, they relent, and the coffin is lifted by his servants to be carried away. Here lies another striking difference between the Grimm Brothers version and Disney's. In the 1812 tale, Snow White does not awaken from a romantic kiss. Instead, as the coffin is being moved, the servants stumble. The jolt dislodges the piece of poisoned apple stuck in her throat. Snow White suddenly coughs, breathes, and opens her eyes. She is alive again, not by magic, not by love, but by accident. The prince rejoices and declares his love for her. Grateful, Snow White agrees to leave with him and promises to become his bride. The dwarfs, though sorrowful to part with her, give their blessing. Back at the castle, the wicked queen once again consults her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But instead of hearing her own name, the mirror answers, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen is stunned. Snow White lives, and worse, she is about to become a queen herself. Her envy burns hotter than ever, but her downfall is near. Snow White, now alive and promised to the prince, begins preparing for her wedding. The dwarfs celebrate with her. grateful that their friend has been restored to life. Word spreads quickly, and people from across the land are invited to the grand celebration. Even the queen receives an invitation. At first, she does not realize whose wedding it is. Still obsessed with her beauty, she cannot resist checking her mirror once more. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? For the first time, the mirror delivers an answer that seals her fate. You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young bride is 1,000 times fairer than you. Horrified, the queen discovers that the bride is none other than Snow White. But her pride and vanity push her to attend, determined to see her rival face to face. When the queen arrives, she is stunned by Snow White's beauty. The once little girl she had tried to murder now stands radiant in a gown, admired by the prince and celebrated by the entire court. The queen realizes she has been utterly defeated. But in the Grimm Brothers world, villains rarely go unpunished. The story delivers justice with a brutal, unforgettable image. At the wedding feast, iron shoes are placed into a fire until they glow red hot. Servants carry them with tongs and place them before the queen. She is forced to step into them and dance. The shoes burn her feet, searing flesh with every step. The court watches as she stumbles and writhes, unable to stop. The Grimm brothers do not spare the details. The queen must dance in the burning shoes until she collapses, dead. This punishment may seem shocking today, but in the world of folklore, it carried a clear message. Vanity and cruelty lead to destruction. Stories like this were meant to terrify listeners into obedience and morality. Snow White's survival and the queen's gruesome death were not just entertainment, they were lessons. In early Europe, tales often used violence as moral warnings. Children were taught that disobedience, jealousy, and vanity had fatal consequences. The image of the queen dancing to her death in red-hot iron shoes was a chilling reminder. Evil may triumph temporarily, but justice will come in the end. After the queen's demise, Snow White and the prince marry, beginning their new life together. To modern readers, it feels like the end of a fairy tale. But for those familiar with the Grimm Brothers collection, this happy ending is only relative. Snow White's journey was filled with death, cruelty, and horror, making the ending less about romance and more about justice and survival. Snow White has survived for centuries, not just because of Disney's magic, but because the tale itself touches something universal: envy, innocence, beauty, and justice. Even in its darkest form, the Grimm Brothers version reflects struggles that feel timeless: the dangers of vanity, the vulnerability of youth, and the fear of betrayal within a family. What makes Snow White different from many other folktales is its disturbing imagery. The queen's demand for Snow White's organs, the grotesque act of cannibalism, the poisoned gifts, the glass coffin, and finally the punishment of burning iron shoes. These are scenes that leave a mark on the imagination. They make the story unforgettable, even if unsettling. When Walt Disney chose Snow White for his first animated feature in 1937, he recognized the story's potential, but also its brutality. To create a film suitable for families, he stripped away the most horrifying details. The cannibalism, the strangulation with laces, and the iron shoes all disappeared. In their place, Disney emphasized love, friendship, music, and hope. The poisoned apple remained, but it was softened into a symbol of temptation rather than a grotesque act of murder. The kiss of true love became the solution, replacing the awkward accident that revived Snow White in the Grimm tale. This transformation worked. Disney's Snow White became the foundation of modern animation and shaped the way generations of children imagined fairy tales. But in doing so, it hid the much darker truth of the story's origins. So why were the Grimm brothers' tales so violent? Part of the answer lies in the audience. These stories weren't originally written only for children. They were moral lessons shared in communities where life was harsh and consequences were real. Tales warned listeners against vanity, greed, and cruelty, often by showing villains meet horrific ends. In Snow White, the queen's punishment isn't just shocking, it reinforces a cultural lesson. Her beauty was her obsession, her envy her downfall, and her vanity literally consumed her. The red-hot iron shoes symbolize her burning jealousy, turned against her in the most literal way possible. Modern audiences may prefer the lighter, more hopeful Disney version, but the fascination with darker fairy tales has never faded. Countless adaptations, from horror films to novels, revisit the Grimm brothers' stories, digging into their macabre roots. People remain intrigued by the idea that behind every innocent childhood tale lies a far more sinister origin. And in a way, that's why Snow White still matters. It reminds us that stories evolve with time. What once frightened listeners now entertains them. But beneath the colorful animation and cheerful songs, the skeleton of the old tale still lurks. A warning about envy, cruelty, and the dangerous lengths people will go for beauty and power. So the next time you think of Snow White, don't picture the singing dwarfs or the prince's kiss. Remember the real story, a tale of blood, jealousy, and punishment so gruesome it haunted Europe for generations. And if you thought this was dark, wait until you hear the chilling truth behind Hansel and Gretel. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe to The Silent Lodge for more amazing content that uncovers the dark side of history and folklore.